She answered me.
You know, it's not as a leader. Okay.
Yeah. So we have one more coming. That's
If you bear with us, it's just one more.
Did someone say restroom?
Oh, no. Does anybody need to use the restroom or anything?
No.
No, you're good? You all want some water?
I think we're good, thank you.
Wait till it's over. It's over. Remind me to express some more.
not to me. Wait.
Everybody here is ready? Everybody here?
Yeah, do spectrum new work.
Are we good? Oh.
Eso tienen los
I'm sorry if my voice is a little off. I have allergies and I forgot to take my pill this morning.
COVID.
Or that. Did you get the last shot? The last shot, like recently?
No.
That one's rough. Yeah, that one's rough. And I apologize for the confusion. I wanted to do it here because we're going to give you an opportunity to tour in the secured area in a housing unit that's exactly like the one. It won't be that one, but it'll be like it. And it's going to be occupied, so you can kind of see the people moving around and how everything kind of goes. I thought that might be interesting for you to see. You can't take any weapons in, so you need to drop your guns and knives off in your car, and you're not allowed to film, or if you do, if you could blur inmates' faces. Right.
Yeah.
But that's why I wanted to do it here, because this is the location it happened. These jails are completely different. You wouldn't get a good idea of what's going on. So is that everybody? Are you still waiting for that one?
We have one more, I gave him a call back.
May I answer the phone, please?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's the last one, Vanessa?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You want to set up, sir? You got to fight all these other people.
Unless Ruben's already doing it.
No pressure.
No, you're good. We're good. Well, I don't know about the rest of them. I'm good.
We should be talking about the gas cards, right?
About the what?
The gas cards at the city hall?
No, I don't know anything about
The migrants.
Right. It's funny, when I first got here, they actually didn't track gas, the usage. So we issued gas cards and nobody knew who was using what or in what car. So I actually had them require the mileage to be put in. And then every month we print it up and we look at the miles per gallon. So if you see a big jump, like if it gets 20 miles per gallon one month and the next month it only gets 5, there might be a problem there, right? Like, where did that gas go? So yeah, but they didn't do it here. They didn't check here either. Those are the things that kind of get away from you if you're not on them. And they add up though, especially fuel. Under Biden.
I don't know nothing. No English.
Good? I was telling them before you got here that I apologize for the confusion. I wanted the press conference to be down here because if you would like, when we're done, you can take a tour of one of the cell blocks that's similar to the one where this incident occurred. And we'll try to get you into the guard station too. There's a different perspective from there. So let me do a little background first. This particular jail has 4 pods, and the one we're going to talk about in that pod has 4 housing units. And when you go into one of those housing units, in general population, there's a guard station that overlooks 6 housing units. And these housing units each hold 24 people. And these inmates congregate during the day in the main room, and they have a TV in there and tablets and a phone and things of that nature, bathrooms, showers. And then there are 4 sleeping areas for those 24 people, and each one of those has 6 beds. So in this housing unit, there's typically 144 inmates. And we meet or exceed the state standard of 1 detention officer for every 48 inmates. So, we had 3 detention officers on duty, times 48 is 144. So this incident occurred right after shift change, which was at 7 p.m. And we do not let anybody leave the floor unless we're meeting the state required 1 for 48. So as people are coming to work, they're taking the place of somebody getting off. But they have to be on the floor, right? Okay, so in this particular case, oh, and by the way, we do a classification. It's a state requirement, and it's our policy to try to place inmates in appropriate cell blocks. And we do that through the use of a system that identifies things like their charge and how many times they've been in jail before and whether their charge is violent or they have violent charges in the past, gang membership, whether they work for a group that would be protected like police officers or judges or things of that nature. So this all goes into a classification officer who determines what cell block they would be appropriate to be housed at, right? So in this particular case, and I only bring this up to kind of give you an idea of some of the people that we're dealing with here. You have to recognize that in a society when you have groups of people, things can happen, right? In El Paso, we've seen a number of incidents involving assaults and shootings and stabbings and murders because people are congregated and things happen. Well, that same thing occurs here in the jail, right? So we've got inmates being booked and housed together with people they didn't choose to be with, that they're going to be living with. They're going to be sleeping and showering and going to the bathroom and eating. And they're together no more than 24 in a housing unit, and there is a potential for clashes, right? They get on each other's nerves, there's verbal arguments, physical arguments, and unfortunately in this case, it actually led to a homicide. Now, it's a rare occurrence, but it does happen. All across the nation and in Texas, we have homicides in jails, county jails, and in prisons, of course, also. And my understanding, the last homicide in an El Paso jail was in 1996. And that individual who committed the homicide was convicted. I believe he was sentenced to death and was put to death a few years ago. So they do happen. Even though we work hard to try to maintain the safety and security of the facility, the inmates, and our personnel. So in this case, the victim had been in and out of separation because of disciplinary problems. And he had been in lockdown for about 30 days and had gotten out, and based upon his classification, was placed in this housing unit. He has a record and has been in and out of this jail and knows our system and knows what he would need to do if he felt unsafe. It's very easy to ask one of our detention officers, I need to get out of here, I don't feel safe, and we would transfer them. We do that routinely. And if it's an emergency situation, there are emergency buttons and intercoms throughout the housing units and in the places that they sleep. So they can hit the button and talk to the guard station officer and request to be moved or for help if they needed it, right? So in this particular case, 6 individuals assaulted the victim and killed them in one of the sleeping areas. Then they placed him in a position to make it look like he was sleeping, and also placed a blanket over his head, so that when the checks were made, the officers believed that he was sleeping. This is not uncommon, by the way. During the day, the doors to the sleeping areas are open and closed, and when they're open, they can move in and out of them. And many inmates sleep during the day. They stay up at night, or they sleep most of the 24 hours because, you know, they're in an environment that they're not really happy to be here, so a lot of them just sleep. So it's not uncommon for detention officers to do a check during the daytime or early evening and find people sleeping. And that's what happened in this case. Oh, one more.
No, you're good, sir.
Oh, you good?
Yeah,
Okay.
keep going.
All right. So the officers on the floor, and there were 2 officers on the floor, are required by the state and our policy to conduct checks every 60 minutes. And the guard station officer is looking around at the inmates, but when the checks are being done, they tend to be more focused on the officers doing the checks to make sure there's no attacks against them. We not only have in this facility, and this is consistent with county jails across Texas and the nation, inmate on inmate assaults, but we have inmate on officer assaults. Many times our officers get hurt, and so the guard station officer is watching as the check is occurring. So while that was going on, the incident with the homicide was going on the other side. And you'll be able to see it when you go do the tour. You kind of see what's going on. Well, one of the things that my administration had done is there are cameras in this facility in the hallways, the main rooms, main hallways, the kitchen, the clinic, the loading dock. But we wanted cameras in the housing areas. And so it took us several years, but we finally got them approved through the Commissioner's Court and installed about 2 years ago. Now these cameras recorded, you can see some of the assault that occurred, right? And you can see the inmates blocking the door, blocking the window, so that if the guard station officer looked over, that officer wouldn't be able to see much, if anything at all. But the cameras recorded everything. The cameras do not substitute for a detention officer, so the officers are not watching the cameras, they're watching the inmates. The cameras record so that when an incident like this, or any number of other things, assaults against officers, officers having to use force against inmates, we have a recording of it. And in this case, we have that recording, which is going to be extremely beneficial in the prosecution of this case. So we do 2 investigations. The criminal investigation is going on right now. It's still going on. And I apologize for the delay in doing this press conference, but quite frankly, I was very concerned because of the complicated nature of this case and the rarity of it, that we didn't jeopardize the criminal case. But we did put out press release, and we were answering your questions to the best of our ability. And now that we've had a chance to meet with the district attorney yesterday, I wanted to do this as quickly as possible, so we set it up for today. So this is a very serious incident. This is something we feel impacts our safety and security, and we're doing things currently to try to maintain control. We haven't had any incidents to date since then. as far as in regards to that homicide. But certainly, these inmates many times will sit around and think of things and watch us and watch other inmates and plan things out. And I will tell you that an interesting piece of evidence that had come up is that this actually was a pre-planned attack against the victim. There was a letter that was located from one of the individuals who was involved in the homicide that they had planned on doing this, and they were just waiting for some additional information. So this was something that was in their mind, something that was planned, and they did everything they could to make sure that it happened by controlling the victim with the 6 other inmates, by trying to block doors and windows, and things of that nature. I also want to say, because I understand there's something out there about that one of the inmates in that particular housing unit heard him. I guess he used the term screaming, but I'm not sure at what level. You're going to see when you go in there, there's 144 people. They're extremely loud. But the interesting thing is, none of the other inmates hit the emergency button. And they're located throughout with the sleeping quarters and the housing unit. And all they had to do was hit that button and not even say a word. And the detention officers would have gone in there looking for a problem. But that didn't happen. Nobody alerted us at all. So throughout the night, the checks were being done. The officers were going in. We do have a electronic recording system. It's a pipe where they have to go up to the door and hit the button, which records that they're at that door. And they're looking, but what they're seeing is what they believe is an inmate sleeping. And it wasn't until the next day when it was discovered that inmate had been murdered. And that triggered the initial criminal investigation. And once that is wrapped up, which it's coming to an end, we will begin an administrative investigation. And we'll be looking at what those 3 detention officers were doing, how they were conducting their checks, what they saw, if anything, to make sure that there were no policy violations that would result in any administrative action. Okay. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. I will do my best to answer any questions, but please understand too, we're not quite done. So there may be some stuff I can't say. But I'll turn it over to you all.
What's the current state of the inmates in that cell block, like after this incident? How did they react to that?
Well, of course, the inmates involved in the assault and homicide were charged and locked down. So they're in solitary confinement. One of them, and I won't say which one, has made a comment to our investigators that he did it and he's going to do it again. So these are the people that we're dealing with. Remember when I told you, like in society, people have conflict? Well, in the jail, that occurs too. The difference is, in jail, we have criminals. Everybody's got a criminal record, and many of them have violent criminal records. And so that's what you're kind of dealing with. That's what our detention officers deal with every day. And so as far as the other inmates, we had to lock down that particular housing unit for a while the investigation was going on. I doubt that they were all put back. They were probably spread out in between downtown and here. And if they need any type of assistance, like if there's any mental issues, if that's what you're concerned, that's available. We have a handbook. They have access to contact our medical health provider that's in the jail.
And according to the affidavits we received, this was a gang-related incident as well, if you could speak a little bit about that.
So that's the one that's a little bit difficult, okay? So the 6 that were charged, and I don't like to use gang names because it gives them notoriety, and I don't think that's good for us, and because I don't want any problems in the jail here, but over this, even though we're probably going to see something eventually. But the 6 were members of a particular gang. The victim, it was suspected, but we never were able to conclude he was, and he actually always denied to us that he was. A lot of gang affiliation comes from the inmates themselves when they come in because they don't want to be put in a tank with a gang that they're warring with, right? So when you come in and you're being interviewed by the intake officer or the classification officer, you'll tell them, I'm a member of this gang, and that way we wouldn't put them in a tank with certain ones. But that didn't happen in this case because he denied to us that he was a member, and we never were able to confirm it. So could it have been? Maybe. But we do believe, based upon that evidence we located, that it probably stemmed originally from personal issues outside the jail.
So regarding the cameras, you don't have somebody that checks the cameras like 24/7 that's there?
There is no one watching them 24/7. So the cameras, now we do have a central control that watches cameras in common areas, opening and closing doors and making sure things aren't happening. In the housing units, and you'll see that when you're going to go on the tour? Yeah? Okay. You'll see that when you go up there, the recording device and the screens are right there on that officer's desk. But that officer is answering the phone, opening doors, talking to people coming in, watching the guards on the floor, watching the inmates, 144 of them. So they don't watch the screen. Because to do so, we're not complying with state standards. It has to be personal observation. We're not allowed to use cameras to substitute for personal observation. So we installed those cameras to have recordings of incidents that occurred, and unfortunately like this, which we would have not, rather have not seen, because most of them are assaults. We released some statistics on assaults that occurred in our jail, and that's typically as far as they get. What will happen is an officer will do a check. They'll see an inmate with a black eye. How'd you get that? A lot of times they won't say because they don't want any problems with the other inmates, right? Some of them will, and we'll call deputies in to make reports and take action if we can. And if now with the cameras, if we have proof of it, we can prosecute that case much easier. Sometimes the officers will see fights, and they'll get their backup and go in and break it up, and we'll charge them appropriately. And we do have, it's not just criminal charges, but we can also file disciplinary charges in the jail where we can take away privileges and lock them in lockdown away from the other inmate if they're fighting or causing us problems. The last one the victim was in for was a destruction of county property, and he was in lockdown for 30 days and got out on the 17th of October. So when he was released, he was classified and put in this cell block, and he'd been fine there. There was no indication that he was having any problems or was getting any threats, nor did we have any information. All of our phone calls from the inmates those are recorded, and we do go and listen to those, but we can't monitor them all. This facility holds 1,880 plus inmates. We've been pretty close to 1,800 every month. So it's a lot of people, but we do have recorded phone calls, and we monitor their mail coming back and forth, but it's not every single call or every single piece of mail. And then he was also in lockdown in September for throwing objects or substances, and then in August he was found guilty of fighting and was locked down for 15 days. So that's the victim was in and out of different cell blocks, and then he ended up in this one after he was released from that last lockdown for disciplinary reasons. Yeah. And again, I only bring this up because he knew the system, and if he felt unsafe, we would have expected that he would have told us, and we didn't have any indication of that, or we would have moved him.
How long was he in jail for?
So he was here for a parole violation, and when was he booked? In June? Yeah, so he's been here since June.
So,
How is it possible that he was getting assaulted 20 minutes and any of the officer hear anything?
So you're going to see it and hear it when you go to take the tour. And again, it's 6 housing units of 24 people for a total of 144. The guard station officer is limited in what he can hear because it's glassed in. The 2 on the floor were going in and out of cell blocks doing checks. So they didn't hear anything over the noise that they have to deal with every day. And when they went in that cell block, they had him in a position and covered up with a blanket to make it appear as if he was asleep.
Do we know how many times they checked the cell before they discovered the body?
So all the checks were done. Every 60 minutes, those officers went into those housing units and checked the doors and looked at the inmates. But again, he had been in a position to make it appear as if he was sleeping. Now remember this one I mentioned back in 1996? The same thing happened. And I believe this was at the downtown facility. And he was murdered, and what they did is they covered him up with a blanket to make it look like he was sleeping. And they even moved him from bunk to bunk. So it looked like he got up and went to another bunk and fell back asleep. So this is not an uncommon tactic. The thing that makes it something we wouldn't necessarily be alerted to is homicides. Although there are homicides in jails, it's rare, and it hasn't happened here since '96. So I believe that our officers do a good job, and this was something out of the ordinary. And again, we'll be checking to see administratively if there were some things those officers could have done better that would have, I'm not necessarily sure we could have prevented the homicide, but that we could have discovered the death quicker.
Sure. Is there any explanation to the wooden cane that they allegedly used?
That was probably assigned to an inmate from the clinic. There was a cane.
Yes.
It was assigned to one of the inmates in that housing unit by the clinic. Yeah, they have crutches.
Crutches, canes, walkers.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have brooms and mops because they clean, and so they have access to things because they, like I had mentioned a little bit earlier, I think before you walked in, it's kind of like a little city. They interact with each other and they're cleaning and they get access to cleaning material, and if they choose to use it for bad purposes, they're going to be held accountable, right? And that's really, I think, one of the main reasons jails tend to be relatively quiet is somebody who gets arrested and put in jail and they're waiting on their charge doesn't want to keep adding to it. So they'll just mind their own business and wait for their court date or whatever they need to do so they can get out of here. So we usually don't have these kind of problems.
Did all this happen presumably during like a recreational period,
No.
or is it just that they shared this salt pod together?
So it's general population. There's 24 in the housing unit. It's open. They're allowed to congregate, and that's pretty much what happened.
Would you be able to speak to just how severe of an issue is gang activity still in the Bar Aztecas?
Okay, so I don't want to talk about specific gangs, as I mentioned that. And by the way, we're going to do a walkthrough, not of that particular housing unit, but one exactly like it, so you can see what our officers have to deal with, the noise, the numbers of people, and we're going to get you into the guard station, hopefully, if we can, so you can see what the guard station officer can see, right? But gang activity is a big issue, not only in El Paso, but certainly in the jail. Yeah, and there's several different kinds of gangs, and there's 2 in particular that I'd rather not name, that we pay attention to, and we never place them together because we know they're a security threat to our facility. But that didn't involve this group.
So particularly throughout the state, you know, there's a lot of violence happening in different
Yes.
jails and prisons.
Yes,
It seems like this might be evident of some of that.
absolutely.
I mean, have you had any discussions with state officials or any other jails about practices, good practices?
Yeah, we actually monitor these as well. I don't know if you were aware of the one in San Antonio in their inmate processing. And you know, they tried to get me to do that open processing, and I refused to do it because I think it's unsafe. So yeah, we monitor and make determinations about, okay, so how did this happen and what can we do here to make sure it doesn't happen? And that was the decision against an open intake area. But we also have personnel assigned to the TAG unit, which is the Texas DPS's, the PD's part of it. We have a small contingent there, and we monitor gang activity. And we have gang intel officers assigned, they're detention officers in the jail. Matter of fact, there may be one or two of them over there. And that's what they do for a living. For instance, the victim, we never were able to confirm for certain, and he denied to us that he was, but their job is to do research and try to find out if in fact they're a gang member. Because if they are, and especially if they're one of two gangs that we particularly watch, they're a threat to the facility. And so we place them in a certain place and monitor their activity a lot closely.
So right now, there's any officers under investigation?
We have not begun an administrative investigation yet, but we will certainly be looking at the 3 officers that were working during the time that this occurred. Again, to determine, I don't want to jump to any conclusions because we're going to finish up the criminal case first, but we'll be looking at those 3 officers just to make sure, because this clearly is a major incident, and we want to look to see, first of all, is there a policy or, as you were mentioning, something we could have done to have made it safer for the inmate, and if not, were our policies followed correctly. So yeah, so we're going to be looking at the whole incident. That's common practice to make sure we're doing the best job we can.
Since the date of the incident, have any policies been changed or any protocols been changed after that happened?
Well, I'll tell you here, at nighttime, officers typically use flashlights, and there is a small amount of lighting, but the lighting goes off at 10:30, I believe, and they're locked in their sleeping quarters. And I've seen officers, when they go up to the doors, they use flashlights, and if they see something suspicious, then they'll go in. They'll have the door open to that sleeping area, and they'll go in and make a check. But I think temporarily the commander here is making them switch all the lights on when the checks are done. Now, from a safety perspective, that sounds great for the inmates until they start complaining that they're being woken up every hour. And they might even get upset and potentially cause us problems over, like, we don't want you turning on the damn lights every hour because we can't sleep. So it really is a balancing act, right? I mean, on one hand, we want the facility to be safe for the inmates and the officers, but on the other hand, this is kind of where they're living, and some of them have been here for years. When COVID hit, and then when that DA office problem occurred, we're backed up. We have more inmates today in both of our jails than we ever had before. The only reason the numbers are not even higher is because we have 3 floors closed downtown because we're doing some infrastructure repairs, sewer pipes and stuff. Otherwise, we'd have another 300 inmates, but we've never had so many inmates before. I think we're 2,400 and something. That's very high for us, and it's because of the backlog. We're backlogged here. We've got people that have been in jail for 6, 7, since 2014, waiting to go to court. And that's not good. And so when they go to bed, they want to sleep all night, and we're turning the lights on every hour. And that's in general population. In lockdown, it's every 30 minutes. So you can imagine how that is. It kind of reminds me of when I had a family member in the hospital and I'd go visit during the day and they say, I'm tired as hell. And why? Well, they come in here every hour to check my blood pressure and they wake me up and then they tell me to get some rest. And it's really going to be the same thing So the commander here ordered that. We'll see how that works out, but that's probably not going to be the solution.
And Sheriff, how many DOs and people working in the jail do you have on staff at the moment?
So the total number we have is 580, 589.
That's like roughly so many inmates to one detention officer.
So that's a very interesting question, because back in the day, Commissioner Perez was trying to limit me to 1 for 48, which is a state requirement. And we do maintain that limit, but we have a lot of officers that do other stuff here. We have administrative, we've got our gang, we have inmate programs, like GED and our PAWS program. We have to have an officer in the kitchen and the clinic, and we have to transport inmates to the hospital. So we believe we are properly staffed and consistent with state requirements, or we exceed that. We do believe, and we never leave a floor without the required 1 for 48, or we'd be in non-compliance and could get decertified.
So you wouldn't say you were experiencing challenges maybe other counties or communities in other parts of the country are seeing?
Well, we are, but not to their degree. I think you're bringing up some stuff. I'll bring up San Antonio again. I have a friend that works in the jail over there. He works 16-hour shifts because they're so short, right? I think Houston is shipping inmates off to Alabama.
Yes.
I don't know who the hell will go to Alabama. They're shipping inmates to Alabama. And because they don't have the staffing, right? We have been able to maintain our staffing. There have been some challenges, but we're doing far better than those other large cities are doing. And I think a lot of it has to do, quite frankly, with the great relationship we have with the community we serve, and quite frankly, a lot of El Pasoans, even though we do lose some, most El Pasoans want to stay home close to their family, and they look for a good job, and it's a good job. This is a good job. It pays well. It's got good benefits. It is dangerous, as you can see from this incident, and things unfortunately do happen. Like when I mentioned the victim's second one, throwing or propelling objects or substances, he could have been throwing stuff at a guard. They throw feces and semen and urine. I mean, it's not a pleasant job, and we house some very, very dangerous people, gang members, cartel members. We have the August 3rd shooter still in jail. We had the killer of Deputy Herrera till recently when we sent him to TDC. So there's some very, very dangerous people in these facilities that our employees have to deal with every day, and I think this incident is a good example of that.
How many guards did you say you have sort of patrolling or looking over all the inmates, looking at the cameras? How many guards did you say were doing that?
So again, it fluctuates depending on the numbers and what housing unit you might be in, right? But in the one similar to where this incident occurred, you would have a minimum of 3. 1 in the guard station, 2 on the floor, and that allows you to watch 144 inmates. And by the way, if you'll check our record with TCJS, you'll see that they were inspecting us every year, and we were doing a great job of being recertified every year. And then it actually went to every 2 years because they don't have the staff to inspect every jail every year. And we were doing so good, they were giving us a year off, as well as some other jails. Although I have a feeling with this incident here, we're going to see them soon, and we'll probably go back to every year, which is fine. They come unannounced, so we're not able to prepare, adding extra people to the floor. We know what the rules are. We follow the rules, and we welcome them to come in and look around. And if there's problems, we want to fix them. If they find issues, we want to know, and we want to fix them. The supervisors in this facility do a good job of finding problems. The assistant chief finds problems, and they correct them. I'll come every once in a while and look around, and if I see things, I'll ask questions. But it's good to have outside eyes sometimes come in and look.
Sheriff, it's a little unrelated, but there's been some concern about the increased rate of deaths in county jails. Can you speak to that? I mean, there've been just different things, whether it's suicide or drug overdose. Address those.
Yeah. Well, again, right. So the things that happen in society are probably going to happen over here, and we do our best to prevent that. I don't know if you had walked in the room yet, but like for suicides, we do have in the inmate handbook and in the housing units a number they can call if they're feeling depressed or feeling suicidal. And of course, we're looking for that. And I'm going to tell you that every year I have an award ceremony, and I give detention officers awards all the time for saving people from committing suicides. They'll catch them hanging, and they'll save their life. They'll do CPR, get them to the hospital, and they revive. But it happens, and some of them unfortunately do pass away. Drugs is another problem. We're not a closed system. Our staff, our vendors are coming and going. We have, they're coming and going to court. Trustees are cleaning and then going back into the secured area. They're actually hiding drugs in our public restroom up here, and then the trustees would come get them and bring them in. And they hide them in places that unfortunately we don't routinely search on the body, if you get what I'm saying. So here's a couple things that we've done because we were seeing an increase in drug deaths. First of all, the mail coming to the inmate is no longer handed to them. We review it, but then we give it, unless it's attorney stuff. Now it's sent to an offsite location that scans it in, and they get it on their tablet. Because what they were doing is they were dropping drugs on the letters so that when they would open it up, they'd have access on the letter itself. It'd be like a liquid, whatever, soaked into the paper. And we might not catch that. Well, now they don't get that stuff anymore. In addition, we installed at both facilities a TSA-like scanner. Every inmate being booked or coming back from outside the secured area goes through. And now we're finding that stuff that we would normally not have. They're hiding it in cavities and stuff that we would not have searched. But we're finding it now. And we're keeping it out. And we are in the process, and we hope to have this in place relatively quickly. We're going to be screening our employees. Anybody, including you, if we had them running, but they're not, would have to go through this device to get in. So it'll be an x-ray machine and a TSA scanner, just in case one of our employees might be someone who might sneak something in. And sometimes they're threatened to do it. So we're trying to stop that so we don't have that issue anymore. And so we've been working really hard, and we've actually made a significant dent in that. We're not seeing the drugs that we used to see just a few, 6-8 months ago.
And I apologize for my last question, I promise.
You're just asking questions you've been trying to ask me for months and months and months.
Yes, and then I promise my last question. I am aware, at least one DO from the past, ran into some trouble with the feds, and
yes.
Even 2 other DOs suffered some repercussions for some activity, possible cartel. Can you just speak to that process, but also, how the sheriff's office is, screening people?
Sure. I think we do a relatively good job. We have a full-time background unit, and we do a good job. But of course, people are people. Sometimes, especially in an organization as big as this, we have almost 1,000 employees. Sometimes bad apples sneak in. And I'm going to tell you that the good people hate that. And they look to me to get rid of those kind of people. So that's my job. In that particular incident, and I'll talk about that since you bring it up, we were notified by the feds that they had information that particular DO was involved in transporting cars from Chaparral back to Mexico. And I guess they would load them up with drugs. Not our people. The cartel people would load them up with drugs. Somebody would drive it over here. They'd unload it, and then this particular DO would drive it back, right? And so he was arrested they alerted us. We work really good with our federal counterparts. They alerted us. The reason I couldn't talk about it at the time is they had flipped him, and they were using him as a CI. And if I would have put that information out, it would have burned them, and burned the Fed's ability to catch other people. So while that's going on, we want to make sure nothing's coming in our facility, right? So because we had no information he was bringing anything in. So we start looking around and doing some checks, and we found that he had asked 2 other DOs to help him move those cars. They alleged that they didn't know what it was, but it was awfully suspicious. And so there was a lot to that case. It was very suspicious activity. And to err on the side of caution, I terminated them both. They appealed to an arbitrator, and I won. That was the extent of that. There was one more guy that wasn't involved in the transporting, but he hung out with them. And when we rechecked his history statement coming in, we discovered he lied about his drug use, and we fired him. And he went to an arbitrator, and I won that too. So we do a good job of keeping him out. And I have to fight my decisions, by the way. I don't have the final say in discipline. I can fire them, but they can appeal, and then I have to prove to a third party it was an appropriate decision. We won those cases, and I think, it's all about the safety here. At the time, I think there were rumors that there was a whole shift involved. That was not true. That they were bringing drugs into the facility, those officers, that was not true. What was true was what I just told you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your.
Sure.
Sheriff,
Okay,
you mentioned the potential for further problems. What's being done to prevent that? And can you elaborate what some of those problems might be?
Right. So clearly, when inmates find out like what gang was involved in the homicide, friends of the victim or his suspected tie to another gang could be very problematic. So really, these gang guys back here are working their asses off trying to prevent future problems by identifying people from those gangs, making sure they're with each other and not with a gang member from a different gang that would be problems. See, we didn't know that particular gang was a security. I mean, we knew that there were problems in the federal system with that gang, but not here. And now that we have this, now we know we need to keep better track of this one. So they're doing evaluations on inmates to see if there's if they happen to be a member or associate, so that we can split people up, put people in lockdown if we have to. Yeah, it's a constant process that they do, and especially new people coming in.
And all 6 suspects are suspected of being members of that gang.
Yeah. But I don't think they were all driven to do that. I think it was driven by 1 or 2, and the others were forced to go along. But again, it's still under investigation. We'll see how all that pans out. You ready for your tour?
Yes.
Okay, so no guns or knives. Leave them in your car. You can bring your cameras. If you take pictures, please blur out the inmate's face so we don't